The following program was produced by an independent community producer. The opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of the ECAT staff or board of directors.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to Humanity First. My name is Peter Evers, your host. And today I just want to start by saying that we're going to be dealing with a very difficult subject today. We're going to be talking about suicide, and not so much suicide prevention, but what we call postvention in the business, which really means being able to work with survivors of people who have taken their own lives or who've died by suicide. And so I just wanted to mention that this may trigger some people. 50% of Americans, as we'll hear, have been touched by suicide one way or the other. And recently, federally, the Senate passed a bill which was to support the suicide hotline. And that number is very easy to remember. It's 988, and resources can be found for people who are really struggling, those who are struggling with the thought of suicide and those who are dealing with family members or loved ones who struggle with suicide. So I just wanted to make that point. We're going to talk about why people take their own lives, and that's a huge question that's almost impossible to answer. And Charlette is going to come on, and Charlette has been on the program before. She was actually talking about community service agencies, but she is actually a member of LOSS, and so we'll find out what LOSS is all about. But as we look at the numbers, suicide is a almost unchecked public health crisis in this country, and we are coming together both on the prevention side and also on the postvention side to look at how we can manage this with peer support and give people the support that they need, not to recover from this kind of loss, but to move through this loss and have people be able to function for the rest of their lives. So we will be back in a couple of minutes to talk to Charlette Fenstermaker about the LOSS Community Services Program. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Jamie. I'm an essential worker here at BAMSI, and I'm a nurse. Nurses are essential here at BAMSI because as nurses, we really have the opportunity to make an impact. We have very small ratios, so we have the opportunity to really learn everything about the person served and be able to give the best care. It really serves such a great purpose for me as being a nurse, and really why I came into nursing. Learn more about nursing opportunities at bamsijobs.org.
Giving a voice to the voiceless, pulling stories out of the shadows and putting them under the spotlight, making sure that each person is valued and cared for. This is Humanity First with Peter Evers, presented by BAMSI.
Well, welcome back, everybody, to Humanity First. And as promised in the first section, I am very happy to welcome back Charlette Fenstermaker, who is our Community Services Agency Director. And anybody who listens to this show regularly will remember that Charlette was a guest probably 6 months ago or something like that. Is that right, Charlette?
Yeah.
But you've come back in to talk to us about a different issue, and it's a very timely issue as well because of what's going on in the suicide prevention world at the moment. We're going to be talking about your work as a volunteer with the LOSS Community Services, which is an organization which is out of Ohio, I think, really who work in a postvention way. And we don't talk about this very much because we talk about a lot about investment in public health around suicide prevention. But we know that suicide is the 11th major cause of death, in America, and I would think that those numbers are pretty steady across the Western world, and it is something that is really a public health crisis. But really what we're going to talk today is about the support that we can offer to families and individuals who have had a loss to suicide. I guess I would begin by saying that thank you so much for doing this work, Charlette, because it must be so difficult to deal with situations like this. This is really the cold face of human emotion and human loss. And there is no better way of dealing with that than speaking about it by engaging with people and also connecting people who have also suffered loss to suicide. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, it's still really, there's a lot of stigma about suicide.
Yes.
Many times when death certificates don't reflect the actual cause of death because families are not, haven't got to a place where they can even contemplate that. And there's a lot of work to be done. And so I would say, I'd like to begin by discussing this, and I'm going to ask you a question that you cannot possibly answer. That's usually the way we do things, right? So a lot of people on their minds is why do people take their own lives? And I mentioned before that we use the word commit when we say commit suicide. That's an absolutely wrong thing to say because if you remember, no, people do not remember, but historically it used to be a crime to take your own life, and that's why we added the word commit as in a crime. We use very different language now. But let's start with that, Charlotte. Why do people take their own lives?
Yeah, and as you said, like that is a question that just cannot be answered by us who are left behind. And it brings up a lot of challenges in the work that those close to the one who died by suicide have to wrestle with. You know, there's all these questions of like why that might have happened. There's a lot of speculation, and it does get in the way of the grief work that the family is able to do. And so, I appreciate you talking about the language around this, and we definitely do stay away from the term commit now and talk about, this is a loved one who lost their life to suicide.
Yeah, I don't think there are many people in our society who have not been touched by somebody who has jumped out of pain in many situations when people take their own lives. It's estimated that I think it's 135 people are usually in the hinterland of that person's lives who are affected by that. And
actually, I was just at the Lost Team National Conference in Ohio, and one of the presenters mentioned that approximately 50% of the U.S. population has been personally impacted by suicide.
Right. So just about the majority of people in this country know somebody or have been affected by suicide. And yet we still find it difficult to talk about, which makes it even more difficult for families to, in a postvention sense. And just tell us a bit about what postvention means, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. Yeah,
I think a lot of people, have heard suicide prevention. We have a Massachusetts Coalition for Suicide Prevention. Each of our counties, most of the counties have a suicide prevention coalition. Postvention is the support for people after there has been a loss to a suicide death. And what we do specifically at the Lost Team in Plymouth County, and you mentioned Lost Team Community Services, they're the Ohio version of what we're doing here.
Okay. So they're not based in Ohio.
Well, they are, but we have, it's a national model. And the national model actually started with Dr. Frank Campbell out of New Orleans. And we follow that model here in Plymouth County. And what we do is we partner with police departments. They are the first responders who often have to tell the family of a loss and why the loss or what the cause of the loss was. And they can then tell the families that there is a loss team that can come out and talk with you. We're a peer support. So when we send a team out, there's always two people, and at least one of them has lost someone to a suicide. So they can really provide some compassion and empathy that a clinician who hasn't experienced that can provide. Peer response is a big thing right now, whether it's our family partners at the CSA or recovery coaches. And that's what we're doing here with the Lost Team, is we're providing a peer response to the families that have just lost someone.
And that makes a lot of sense to me because I have, like everybody else, have known good friends of mine who have lost, and I have lost good friends of mine actually to suicide over the years. But one of the things that the parents on these two occasions of people I know immediately blame themselves. That's exactly where we go as human beings, especially when it's our own children. It is the worst thing that could happen to a human being. Not surprising that you would begin immediately to say, what did I do wrong, right? And I'm imagining that's what you hear with the peers when you go out.
It's really a lot of mixed emotions. And there can be, some guilt that they were responsible in some way. There's shame. How could this happen in my family? How did I not see the signs? But also, like, there's sometimes anger. And I think that's something that our peer response can like support the family with, that it's okay to be angry, that it's okay to have anger and sadness at the same time. Like these are your feelings, and it's okay to feel them, and it's important to feel them.
I think we talked last week about when I worked at a particular agency, the in-home team supervisor, in a very public way, took their own life, and somebody who was very close to them, to that person, when they came into the debrief, was screaming at this individual. How could you do this? And again, another very natural reaction. Somebody is so hurt that they want to. They're more expulsive than sort of impulsive, right?
Yes.
That they'll want to be angry about that. So when the work takes place, is it a one and done in terms of working with the family?
Yeah. So the loss team response is that with a follow-up phone call. Yeah. So the police would activate us. They would contact us after the family is given permission. And sometimes we go out in the moment. So we can go out to the scene if needed. And what we do there is really support the family, in that moment. And we sit for about an hour to an hour and a half. We kind of let the family lead. If they have things they want to talk about, we let them talk. We listen. We empathize, might share a little bit that so they know that we're a loss survivor, but we don't share our own stories or anything like that. And then we leave a packet of information behind. And this packet has a lot of different handouts and resources, local resources for follow-up for them. But also just like one of the resources, for example, is how to talk to children about suicide. And that it is important to talk to children about suicide. They're going to have questions and just how to go about that. And then we do a follow-up we ask if it's okay to do a follow-up phone call about a week later. We just check in with them, see if they have anything else that they might need from us. And that's where, we kind of end our support with the family, because, it's good for them to maybe know that this isn't necessarily going to be someone that I have to talk to on a regular basis. Right. They may not be ready for that. But we do give them supports, like Hope Floats, for example, in Kingston, who provide bereavement support groups, and they do have specific support groups for suicide. Safe Place in New Bedford area. There's some online resources that Metro West Loss Team offer, things like that.
Yeah. And I used to go and do trainings for when I was up in New Hampshire for an organization called Peeling the Onion, which is very similar to what you're talking about. And those really that support can go on for years and years, right? I mean, people get to know each other quite well. And I totally agree with you. This idea that peers have an idea of what somebody's been through, and somebody who hasn't been through this doesn't understand. They can have empathy for it, but they really cannot dial into what that means for people.
Yeah, and I think it does allow the families to open up in a different way, because we do understand that stigma, and we know that they know that we understand a little bit differently than their friends might, or someone who hasn't experienced this type of loss. And there is a lot of evidence that peer connection is really, really important for families to start the healing process.
Yeah. Let's talk about healing for a minute, because there's probably a lot of people that are listening that say, how do you heal from that? How do you come back from that? I think when I've spoken to people throughout my career, there is healing, but there isn't moving on, and well, there's moving on, but this doesn't go away for families. I love the fact that there's this sort of restoration of hope, this sort of idea of the worst thing that you could probably imagine has just happened. What's next? It isn't just putting it in a cupboard and saying, okay, that's a part of my life that I'm not going to think about. It doesn't happen like that, right?
Yeah. One of the stories that was talked about this past couple of days at the Lost Team National Conference was someone shared how a woman had come back and, ran into them a couple of years after she had had a loss and the Lost Team came out. And what she had said to the Lost Team was that, I remember you had fingernail polish on, and I thought, how could I ever put fingernail polish on again? And this was someone who had had a loss, and she was able to see that a peer was able to move through that grief. And that's how we kind of say it, is moving through it. We'll never move on from it. Right. But it's we move through it and we find ways to continue on.
Yeah. Grief is a fascinating term. It's a fascinating thing to study because grief is different for everybody, isn't it? People, this sort of expectation. I remember when my dad passed in 2012. My mum, and she still finds it really difficult to sort of move on from that. That process is as long as a piece of string is, right? I mean, it is very personal. Mm-hmm. I do think you would agree with me, though, that people reach out and get help have a better chance of managing grief and then being able to function in society. And I guess the message I would say was that people should always reach out, should always connect.
Yes.
Because we're human beings, right?
Yes. And I think that's, one of the needs of mourning is to have that connection. Yeah. And, when you think about a Lost Team, Denise Monogram, who is the one from Columbus, she is training Lost Teams now. And she says she thinks of 3 Ps: proactive. We go out before the family, almost before the family even has a time to think about, like, do I want that?
Right.
Like they're in shock, right. And we go out and help. Peer, because it's important for them to know that we've experienced something, not the same, but similar. And then the third one is with purpose. Mm-hmm. And the purpose is to bring an installation of hope to the family in this face of an incredible tragedy. Yeah. And that's what we do at the Lost Team. Yeah,
and it's just so important. I guess one of the things, is a couple of things I want to cover just before we finish, because we've probably got 2 or 3 minutes left. But when we look at suicide as a genre, I guess, there is a lot of evidence in psychological autopsy that there is oftentimes an underlying mental illness. There's something that oftentimes undiagnosed, and oftentimes there are signs which people don't put into perspective because they're small things that people recognize. But with all of that, and knowing all of that, and knowing that families struggle with this, what makes some families better equipped, I suppose, to deal with something like this? What are the strengths you think that underlie moving on in a more healthy way?
It really is such an individual thing. It can depend on the cohesion of the family. Mm. The makeup of the family, but also, like, do they have supports? Do they have natural, people there to kind of bring them the support that they need? Thinking about, like, the thirds of the people in your life, like, you have people that you will never talk to this because they're not going to respond well, and then you have people who are going to say, yeah, call me if you need something, and you're never going to call them. Right. But it's having that connection to someone who, like, just comes over and naturally supports you. Right. And resiliency, having been through something in the past that may have been difficult often helps people build that resiliency to to move through some of the things that they might experience also.
Yeah. I've told quite a few people about this, but my father's first wife took her own life a long, long time ago. And what was really interesting, that my father grew up in an orphanage, and he was a very, very resilient man, never talked about it. And that was the way. And it was also a cultural thing in English. It was also a time thing, because this was the 1950s. But he moved through his entire life until he was dying when he started to talk about this. And I always thought, I wish you'd been able to share with us how you felt about that, rather than protecting us from what you thought, how upset we would have been. And I always thought that was a lesson for me, that, nobody should have to go through this on their own.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we try to let people know when we go out as the Lost team is, everyone in this home is going to experience grief in a different way. And it may not be the way that you think they should, but just, be patient with each other, give each other permission to grieve the way that they need to. And we put the grieving person's Bill of Rights right in our packet as well, so that they can read through that and go, oh, it's okay for me to say no to my friends when they want to go out and I don't.
It's such an
things like that.
Such an important thing. That it's a very personal journey, but that personal journey needs to be accompanied by people who care and love about them. And if you can't let those people in, then maybe you will do in a week, in a month, in a year. Just to finish, I know that the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention have a special day coming up on, I think, November 23rd. Just talk about that a little bit.
Yes. So it's Lost Survivor Day. And we're partnering with the Plymouth County Suicide Prevention Coalition and AFSP to host an event at the Hanover Public Library from 11 to 1. So definitely be looking for information about that on social media through the Suicide Prevention Coalition and also the Lost Team Plymouth County. You can find us on Facebook. And we also have a website at lostteamplymouthcounty.org.
Charlotte, thank you so much for the work you're doing. I can only imagine how difficult it is. Thank you for coming on Humanity First again. And hopefully you'll come back again and give us an update on the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlotte. Goodbye, everybody.